ordinarily, when everything is normal, we have lab meetings, and we do them once a week. And usually like one person in the lab is on the chopping block. So that's the time where you stand in front of your boss and all of the other scientists, and you kind of give everybody updates on what you've been doing, like what experiments you've been doing and what data you're getting, and if it's looking good, if it's looking bad, all of that. And it's a chance to get feedback. So we're still doing that. It's just that we're doing them virtually on Zoom and stuff like that. So last week it was my turn, and this week it was someone else's turn. And the rest of us just mute ourselves, and then our boss and the person who's presenting kind of banter back and forth. And then at the end, we all unmute and give little feedbacks and suggestions and stuff like that. And it's actually been pretty helpful. It's better than not doing anything during this time.
All right, so first of all, let me go ahead and introduce everybody. Welcome to the Savages and Scholars. And that was Mary's introduction. Can you give us a little bit more about yourself and who you are?
Yeah, definitely. So I am 24 years old, and I'm a PhD candidate at Baylor College of Medicine here in Houston. So I'm getting my PhD in developmental biology, which is basically all of the cellular processes by which a single cell, a fertilized egg, can become a fully patterned organism with all of its specialized tissues and cell types and characteristics and whatnot. But I actually work in the Department of Neurosurgery, and my research topic is spinal cord injuries. And I'm trying to develop like a treatment or a therapy to help regenerate injured spinal cord tissue so people aren't paralyzed anymore. And I definitely haven't always been like a scientist. I grew up on a farm, actually. I'm the youngest of 3 girls, and we lived out in the country in the middle of nowhere in Michigan. And I'm the first one in my family to even finish high school, let alone go to college, let alone pursue a PhD. So I'm kind of the black sheep, like weirdo of the family for leaving home and going off and doing all these weird, like scientific things. But it's been really fun. I'm very passionate about what I do. It's really great.
So as the black sheep, right? Is that, do they say that over there? Do they even talk about sheep in the farm?
We did not have sheep on the farm, and I don't think they would say that. My family probably wouldn't say Mary's the black sheep, but they're definitely like, she's a weird one. Oh yeah, she's weird. That girl, she up and left. She doesn't even sound like she's from Michigan anymore. Like, she just flew out of here. That's kind of probably what they say.
As they're milking cows, right?
Yeah, oh gosh, oh geez.
Definitely weird. She's doing all of these weird things.
Yeah, she's doing something with science. I don't know. That's how my mom tells people about it. Some kind of scientist. I don't know. That's what she says when people ask.
Oh, but I'm sure she's proud of you, though.
Yeah, she is. I think my family definitely, because it's something no one else in the family did, they definitely didn't like it. Like, they didn't like that I was leaving home for college, and they definitely didn't like it that I still am not at home. That's something that was like kind of tricky for a long time. I think it was sort of difficult to tell, I grew up with a single mom, but to tell her and my sisters that I was leaving and pursuing this totally different career, and I was going to be around new people and living in a new place. There was this weird edge to it where it's like, you're not just leaving home, you're kind of leaving the socioeconomic class that you grew up in a way. And suddenly you're keeping company with like really educated, wealthier people. And that, I think, was really difficult for my mom, and it really scared her. I think she was afraid for several years that it was going to change me a lot, and that I wasn't going to blend in anymore with the family. And things got a little tense when I was in college. There was a little push and pull where they wanted me to be happy and do what I wanted to do, but I think they were really fearful that I was going to change and not get along with them, or that I wouldn't respect them anymore. And that totally wasn't the case at all. And I think it took a few years for me to graduate and start to become a professional in my field, and my mom and my sisters to still see that I still actually have a lot of the same values that they gave me growing up. And I still absolutely love and revere my blue collar family, more than anything in the whole world. And if anything, it gives me a really good understanding of things as I kind of carve out the life that I want to for myself. I think it really helps having that kind of different background, especially because a lot of people I went to school with, because I went to Yale, I went to kind of a fancy school. So most of my classmates were kind of wealthy. They were very privileged pretty much every respect of that word. And I think that I actually have a really valuable perspective growing up in a different way. But it was hard. It was really hard to actually leave and do that. And now, thankfully, I think people are more on board. And my older sisters have had babies, so the pressure's off. My mom's like, all right, Mary, you can go do your weird stuff, and it's going well.
I can imagine this like scene, right, where like somebody's trying to like corral a horse, right, and it's just like they're like trying to corral it, but it's being too wild, right? So then the horse escapes, and then somebody get that horse. And then like you're walking by and they just grab a rope, and then you tame it right there, right? You know, you're taming the horse. They're like, nothing's changed, right? You're still same old, same old.
Wow, I like that. I like the theming.
So what made you decide to pursue biology as in your education and your career? Because I'm imagining, since you grew up on a farm, you know a lot about growing crops and about soil and about. Did you help your mom on the farm, like, or did
A
she
little
have
bit.
people that would help?
It was more like we lived in a little trailer mobile home like down the road from a farm, and the guy on the farm had a daughter the exact same age as me, and it was literally like all I could see across the road was the farm. So I just went over there and spent my childhood there, but it was the neighbor's farm technically. And to be honest, as little girls, we did a lot more playing than working. So it was a good childhood where we'd like ride four-wheelers, and we had some chores. We would feed the pigs, and we would do the time cards for the farm hands and stuff like that. But most of the like slaughtering and tractor driving and all of that was really done by the men on the farm and my friend's older brother. So we like raised pigs for 4-H and showed them at the county fair, but we didn't do the slaughter. We were kind of sheltered being the girls on the farm. So I definitely grew up with a fascination for kind of organic stuff, just life, I think. And to me, even as a little girl, I think what was really fascinating was what is the difference between, like, if everything's made of atoms and molecules, like, why is it that dirt and rocks are just dirt and rocks, but a tree is a living thing? Like, what is different? Where's that little spark? And I think I was really curious about that, which is what made me really interested in science in a lot of different ways. But my answer to why I became a scientist, it's kind of not a good answer. It's like a lot of the cartoons that I watched as a kid had really prominent science characters. Like I loved the Powerpuff Girls. That was my favorite show. And their dad is the professor. They call him professor, and he wears a lab coat and smokes a pipe, and he wanted a family, so he used science to create these little superhero girls to be his family. And I also grew up watching like Dexter's Lab, where this little dorky kid has like a whole cool secret lab in the basement of his house and makes cool stuff. Yeah, and I feel like growing up and seeing that, it kind of got in my head like, yeah, I want to be a scientist and like make stuff and have chemicals and wear a lab coat. And I think that's kind of what pushed me to be curious about that, because I'm curious about a lot of things, and I always was. And I liked art, I liked all kinds of stuff. But professionally, I liked that kind of vision of being a scientist. I think it's from the cartoons.
That's awesome. Hey,
I feel like so I've never written that in an essay for an application, but whenever you're applying to school and jobs, they're always like, what got you interested? And I can't say the Powerpuff Girls. Like I have to think of something else. So I'll like really scrape and I'll be like, oh yeah, my neighbor had back problems. And I was like, I want to help people. Because that's what you're supposed to say. You can't say, I want to be the professor and make superhero children. You can't say that.
I think you could. I think you could get away with it. It would sound quirky, right?
It would sound like you were watching this anime of the scientist that created life. And they're like, oh, would you like him?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd hire that person.
It would definitely stand out. You'd be totally different from all the other candidates.
For sure. I mean, like I saw those cartoons too, but I wanted to be a motorcycle. So
you wanted to be the motorcycle?
The motorcycle itself, yeah.
Yeah, wow, that is ambitious.
And that was actually, I remember that because it was like a time between like me, my brother, we all wanted to be inanimate objects at one point. I don't know why.
That is fascinating.
What did your brother want to be?
Alvaro wanted to be a motorcycle as well. I heard him say it, and I was just like, that's cool. I want that too. Then my little brother, he wanted to be a crocodile. My other brother,
And y'all aren't scientists, right?
we are not scientists. I didn't go to school for computer science, if that makes any difference. That's a different type of science.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But Anthony's also going to school for being a doctor, and Janet's going to school for being a nurse.
Nice.
That is 100% a lie.
Both of those are lies. Anthony, what are you going to school for?
I'm getting a business degree right now.
A physics degree, of course.
Degree.
You know what, Anthony? I have to say that's like my least favorite of the sciences. But it's like I like it, but it's my least favorite. Why do you like physics?
I didn't say physics. I said business.
Business.
Physics. He would go with it too. Had you continued on, it's just like, oh, physics.
I'm gonna go with it.
You know, business is a lot better.
Business makes more physics.
No, it's terrible. It's the degree people get when they don't know what they want to do.
I
You think so?
Yeah, I think it's a degree of the person that wants to, like, come up with something. They're like, I'll come up with something later, and they'll get that degree, and the degree will allow them to see things that other people can't. I used to think that business people were not very what's it called, very useful, but as the more and more time passes by, they're 100% the main thing for most things. Like, you'll see, like one of the big things in entrepreneurship that they'll talk about is like how most products die, and the main reason why most products die is because people don't know how to sell them. They don't know how to do anything around business. They'll just be like, I'll just work on my things, and they're like, maybe that'll sell it, but if nobody else knows it, nobody cares.
Yeah,
That's actually a big problem in science too.
It's
In
a
terms
huge
of-
problem.
Yeah, because that's how you get grants, is you have to be able to communicate what your project is and why it's helpful and how it fills a gap that's in the field. And scientists aren't really known to be good communicators. Like, we're typically not super outgoing people. So it's actually a big challenge, is getting the public to understand what you've even got when you have something good.
Yeah, that's always been my fight against math. Math has this thing where, like, they just don't know how to sell it. They just don't know how to sell it. They have the opposite of selling it. People tell you from the beginning, since you're a kid, that math is hard. And then you're like, math is hard. Because everybody thinks that.
Yeah.
So you got to hire Anthony to sell you math.
That's true. Anthony.
I used to work in sales. I used to sell insurance and insurance accessories. And my boss, he reminded me of Michael Scott a lot, because he would call me into his office and have like these pep talk kind of meetings with me, like one-on-one. Or if there was like other people in the office, he'd call everyone in and we'd have these meetings. Very, very office-like, because it was like, I swear to God, he said this. He word for word said, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember, that's something that Mike.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
Well, you know what? I've said that before as well. So,
But point being, he told me that during one of these pep talks, without sales, he was like, without sales, there's nothing. You need to sell in order for things to be moving. You need to sell computers in order for them to be used in office spaces and workplaces and things like that. So
Isn't selling like the #1 job in the world?
yeah, I read that in a book as well.
Yeah, and I heard that from you.
Mm-hmm. So there you go. #1.
We're going full circle.
So, who you said you got, like, Powerpuff Girls sold you science, and then now you were like, I'm gonna become a scientist. You're a biologist, right? And a
Yes.
PhD candidate. Janet,
Yeah.
you are also going for biology.
Right, that's right. I'm going to UHD to get my bachelor's in biology.
Cool.
Yeah, as well. And I kind of have always really known that I wanted to be a scientist, but like when I was younger, I was like, I don't know if I'm smart enough. I don't know if I want to put the time and the studying and the effort into it. And I waited too long, you know, to finally say, I've always wanted to do it. Like, I really shouldn't be making any excuses to kind of just jump into it. And since I've started going there, I've loved it. Like, I've loved every single class that I've taken, even though like it's really like, if like going to school for biology, like you have to take all like the natural sciences, right? Like you kind of have to have an understanding of a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of physics. But it's like, all right, so now that I got that out of the way, now I can dive into, you know, genetics and biological evolution and those lab reports. Oh my God, I've never written as many lab reports as I have now. And I think that, you know, I could write a lab report about anything now. Like,
Yeah.
I'm
She's in the cell game with it.
That's awesome. That is really cool.
I'm sorry, go
I was
ahead.
going to say, I think one of the biggest things about like, for me, becoming a scientist is that when you realize that it's actually very, very different from being a science student. Because when you're a student in a class and you're learning information that we just accept to be true out of a textbook, that is a whole different game than being a scientist where you're trying to create new information and answer questions. And you never really know if what you're measuring is real or if your answer to the question is true. And, you know, if you prove it enough times, we accept it as a fact and it goes into the books. But generating those truths and just memorizing them are so different as activities. And as I started to realize that, which didn't happen until, you know, I was into college, it kind of shook me a little bit. For a minute, I was like, oh no, I'm such a good student, but am I cut out to actually do the thing, like do it in practice? It's so different. And like you're saying, you kind of have to just dive in and like screw around and get your hands dirty and do it a few times. And then you start to understand how to ask questions, how to pursue them and design experiments and trust your data and stuff like that. But yeah, it seems like this scary, nebulous, inaccessible thing for a long time until you get there and you realize it is just a group of normal people screwing around trying to figure stuff out. And anyone, I think almost anybody can do it if you're driven by curiosity. And like how you said that you were really passionate and curious for a long time, I really think that's what it takes. It's just diligence and curiosity to be good at it.
Yeah, how many times did you, while you were getting your hands dirty, break the laws of physics?
I don't know how many times I've broken the laws of physics, but I will say I'm a clumsy person. I have definitely broken apparatus. I've definitely spilled precious cell samples across the floor, dangerous chemicals across the floor. I've squirted paraformaldehyde at myself and others.
It's that Powerpuff Girls thing all over. You're just
Yeah,
waiting.
I've got to have at least some kind of superpower by now. Yeah, I'm hoping so.
You're just waiting for that chemical X so you can drop it and then get kids.
You're that girl in that video, in the lab video, the lab safety video.
Yeah, they should put me in the safety video. No, I think one of my worst ones was I was doing this really intense experiment. It was super important, really high time crunch. Like I needed to get this done today. I was going to be working until like midnight. And I had these two specialized like glass, like mortar and pestle types of things. And I was basically taking mouse eyeballs, okay, and putting them in there and grinding them up really fast. And like I had this whole procedure. It was great. It's beautiful protocol I've designed. And my boss, I turned to say something to him and he's like, I'm heading out. Are you okay? Do you have everything under control? And I go, oh yeah, I got this. And right then this detergent on my gloves made the glass thing just slip right out of my hand and it shattered across the floor, like right between our feet. And I was just looking at the shattered pieces on the ground. And then I like looked back up at him and he was like, what does that mean? And I was like, I can fix this, just go home. And I like ran around and tried to find a replacement one and I couldn't really find a replacement one and it was actually not fine. It was a disaster, but it was just all the worse that he was right there. He saw it happen. He saw the shame in my face and also this is just who I am, like acceptance of it too, that came right after. So that was my worst, most recent one. That happened in like October and I'm still kind of scarred about it.
Oh, that's crazy. Well, the good thing is that it happened right away, right? Because had it happened right after,
no, this was 5 o'clock. I had started around 8 in the morning and I was going to be going until midnight. We were right around halfway. Yeah.
Well, what I mean by right away is like he was about to leave. He was just like, You know, so like,
He had one foot out the door already.
yeah, he was already gonna be like, all right, I saw it. It happened underneath his watch. All right, it's his
That's
fault
true.
technically. All right.
He did distract me. He made me nervous.
Yeah. So,
Also,
so
to be honest, my hands were slippery because I was trying to clean it extra good because he was watching. And usually I just kind of rinse it off and then do the next one. But I was like, oh, here I go, spraying it with stuff and really cleaning it good. And then it was slippery and it fell out of my hands.
mm.
So it kind of was his fault. I like how the conversation's going. I feel better about that now. I'll sleep better tonight having talked about it this way.
You should shame him for it. You should just be like, if you see him,
Trent.
yeah, you should just be like, look, bro, I was doing good, and then you talk to me, and then the serendipity happened. But
Yeah.
Are you still able to do your research right now? I mean,
No.
you can't
No,
go at all?
back on, it was Friday the 13th of March. I'll never forget. They emailed us all and were like, hey, at 6 p.m., you're going to lose badge access. And they had been whispering. There were rumors about this for about a week beforehand. And then it really happened and they didn't give us a lot of time. So we basically are locked out. So if I were to go to the lab right now, my badge wouldn't let me in. So that's unfortunate. So I can't do any experiments, and it meant that anything you were working on, you had to just kind of terminate and freeze. And it's weird. It's very weird to not be able to go in and do stuff. So in the meantime, we're still trying to be productive. So I am writing a grant. So I'm able to write that. So I'm reading a lot of research that's published and trying to really come up with a good, clear, kind of a sales pitch of your research, basically, to try to get money for it. So I'm able to work on that kind of thing and get feedback from my boss and send drafts back and forth. So I do stuff like that mostly right now.
Oh, that sucks. I know that a lot of people they can't, like, research, I think, is like, it's funny that the research is like the last thing that we need to be doing right now during quarantine, when
I know.
it should be like a priority. Like, we, like, all the scientists need to be at work. But I understand why, like, it's not safe to be around within 6 feet of another person.
Yeah,
Also,
and I guess labs that are researching like COVID-19 related stuff, they are still going. So that was the thing, is all research terminated unless you are doing a clinical trial and you have patients who depend on you, or if you're doing COVID related research. Other than that, everybody had to leave. So those people are still coming in.
oh,
It's crazy.
that sucks. What happened to the eyeballs?
I got all the eyeballs in a good shape to leave them. We go through a lot of eyeballs. So I actually do spinal cord stuff, but my lab does a lot of ophthalmology kind of research. So like eyeball stuff. Basically, we study nerve injuries. And while I'm interested in the spinal cord as well as the sciatic nerve, which is the kind of like the big nerve that runs from the spine through the leg, it's kind of like in your groin, that big nerve. I mostly use those. However, my lab actually studies injuries using the nerve that's at the back of the eyeball that runs to the brain, the optic nerve. They'll actually do surgeries where they do injuries to that. And then the cell bodies are located in the retina, because nerve cells are very long. So they're kind of rooted in the retina in the back of the eye, but they reach out very far back to the brain. So you can injure them, and then you can see what the cells in the retina, how they're responding to that injury kind of, and do manipulations that way. So I'm very fast. I can like pull the eyeball out and get the retina in like a beautiful, perfect little mount on a slide, like super fast.
Oh man, kind of
Yeah,
like
I have a weird job. It's a really weird job.
kind of like how people who like know how to do crabs, you know what I'm talking about? Like, or like,
Oh yeah, now that I live in Texas, yeah, or like the crawfish. That's a thing here. Yeah, this is new. So I just had my first crawfish a couple weeks ago. And I don't mean one, I had like a huge bag of them, like a pound of them. We don't eat that in Michigan. I don't even know if we have them up there. But the way you have to like do a whole like ritual to get the meat out, you know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about, because you're Texans, yeah?
yeah,
Of course.
Yeah, okay, so I just experienced it.
Every time.
Yeah.
How did you know that you were gonna like it? You ordered a pound of crawfish?
I was with other people who are native Texans, and they had been talking about crawfish for a long time. And finally I was like, I've never had this. And so they're like, we got to go to Anahuac. And we went to Anahuac, Texas, where there was this like blue, like shoebox looking place. And they're like, this is the place. And we go in and they got so much crawfish and shrimp and these like boudin balls, which I've never heard of either. And I loved all of it. It was great.
What do they have in Michigan that's food related?
Oh, like special Michigan things? Well, we grow up eating a lot of corn and potatoes, obviously, because it's a rural farmy state. But we definitely have some Michigan specialties. I'll have you know, Coney Islands are Detroit original things. Like it's a Detroit thing. So all the OG Coney Islands we have, not that that's that special or like ethnic, but we do. We have like Superman ice cream. That's a Michigan thing.
Ooh.
Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Ice cream.
Anthony, have you had it?
No, I've not.
Okay, it's kind of, I can't even explain the way it tastes because it just has its own taste. It's like describing how Coke tastes, you know? Like it's iconic. So it's like a rainbow color. It's like yellow and green and blue and red. And it just is kind of fruity, kind of like sherbet, I guess, if I had to say something. We've got Verner's ginger ale, which is the best ginger ale you can ever get. It's super strong. It kind of burns your nose hairs when you drink it. And it's what everybody gets when they're sick, because they get Verner's. And I don't know, we did a lot of venison because we have big deer, and deer are like an invasive species problem in Michigan. So everybody has venison meat, stew, and venison like jerky all the time. We got the first day of hunting season off every year because they knew no one was going to show up because everybody was out hunting. It was kind of like that.
You know, that's crazy because like I did not know that Detroit was in Michigan.
What? I was born in Detroit.
Now you have something to remember that by.
Yeah, you know, it's a well, the thing is just like Detroit is such a colorful city, right? The city is like such a name, and it has such a like a, you know, like Houston has like a big pull. Houston would be Houston, not in Texas, right? Houston would be Houston anywhere, right? Where Houston is. But there's certain cities that are like that, like San Francisco. Like people would say San Francisco, but they might not know that it's in California. Obviously, most people do. But the fact that San Francisco brings a specific image to your mind means that San Francisco has more pull than the rest of California that doesn't.
Yeah, kind of like Chicago being in Illinois.
Exactly. Yeah, so I like Michigan. I think aren't they good with cheese, or is that Wisconsin?
That's kind of a Wisconsin thing.
Yeah. Are you guys next to each other?
Yes, we're neighbors. We're flanked by by one of the Great Lakes, but the Great Lakes are ours. We're the Great Lakes state. We own all of the lakes.
Oh, is that true?
Yes. Yeah.
So
you know the Great Lakes?
You have all the water rights to the Great Lakes?
I believe so, yeah. We definitely talk about them like they're ours.
That sounds very American.
You can't.
Yeah.
It
is. It's fascinating. So the point you're bringing up about Detroit being kind of like distinct almost from greater Michigan. The weird thing about Michigan is it's like that. Like the cities are predominantly African American for one thing, and the cities, the whole state of Michigan like is really broke. We have no money, so the cities are pretty run down and they're in pretty bad shape. They're dodgy. There's a lot of like gang stuff, and it's just dicey. They're rough places. It's like Detroit and Flint and Jackson, and they're all pretty rough. And then you go out in the country and it's like the opposite. It's like real honky, really, really white people, super like redneck, Obama's trying to take my guns kind of stuff. And it's really interesting. That's why Michigan is such a swing state, because the cities are one way and the country is the other way. And it's like, you never know which way we're going to ping or pong for an election, because it's so evenly matched kind of. So I spent more time out in the country. I hope that doesn't reflect on my character too much. But it's really interesting. Like you'll see people who have never left the state of Michigan with like rebel flag tattoos. And you're like, what's that about? Like Confederate flags. And they'll say, oh, it's Southern pride. And it's like, we're in Michigan, man. Like, you know, we're tapping maple syrup. Like,
geography lesson?
Huh?
I was saying, is Michigan part of the South? I thought I thought they were part of the middle. You know,
You'd think, yeah, I don't know. It's weird. So there's like this interesting country culture where you go out and people, I don't know. I've even heard people kind of put on like southern accents in certain parts of Michigan because they're just trying to exude this like country folk persona. And it really just baffles me. Like when I was a kid, I didn't think about it. And then I left the state for college, came back, and I was like, this is weird. Like there's a lot going on here to unpack that's like not, doesn't make any sense.
did anybody tell you that whenever you were at Yale?
People would stop me and ask me if I was Canadian often. People would say, oh, are you international? And I'd say no. And they're like, aren't you Canadian the way you talk? And I'd laugh and say, no, I'm from Michigan. And my accent was stronger then probably. And then people would ask if I was from Wisconsin, and I would also say, no, I'm from Michigan, which is not exactly the same thing, but it's almost the same thing.
Well, where is Yale?
So Yale's in Connecticut, so all the way over to the East Coast. So pretty much just as north as Michigan, but straight to the water.
And they have a different accent there, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, being on campus, it was so kind of eclectic just because you got people from everywhere. The bulk of the school came from New England, so places like New York and Boston and Connecticut and stuff, and then New Hampshire, and then California. So those two kind of like edges of the country are what made up the majority of the school. And then there was very few from the Midwest and very few from anywhere in the South, few Texans. I know Texas, I've learned that by now, likes to be distinguished from the rest of the South or Southwest. There's Texas, and there's the South, and there's the Southwest.
Right, thank you.
We didn't have a lot of any of them.
Yeah, I mean, had you not mentioned it, it was at the tip of my tongue.
Oh, I bet.
I was about to be like, and Texas. Texas too.
I don't know I don't know if we're South or where like
Where
like
the South is to come.
No, I was gonna say Southwest. Like I think that people try to differentiate us as like Southwest, South, but I think we're just Texas. I think we just want to be our own thing.
Yeah, I gotta say though, I love Texas. It's my favorite place I've lived because I also lived in California for a while, for like 3 or 4 months. I was in the Bay Area by San Francisco. I was at Stanford, so I was in Palo Alto, and I was there doing science research. And I gotta say though, I really like Texas. Like I would like to stay here. I hope I can kind of carve out my academic professorship career and stuff and stay in Texas because I really like the state a lot.
So if you have to like throw like a rock dagger in the dark to see like where do you think you're gonna land once you finish your PhD candidacy?
Well, once you get your PhD, and for me that'll be in probably about 3 years or so, maybe longer, 3 or 4. You have to usually apply for a postdoctoral research position. So you're a postdoc because you've already got your doctorate. I'd be Doc Edgington, and you'd go and basically do the same thing you're doing now. Like you do research, but it's a little more independent. Right now, my mentor, my boss, kind of holds my hand a little more than he would if I was had my doctorate already. So you go and you do that for a couple of years, and you try to publish more papers and get your name out there. And for me, I'm thinking about maybe looking at places like Texas A&M for that because we have collaborators there who I already know. I would fit in well and gel well with their labs. And it'd be a cool like new perspective to a topic that I want to work in for the rest of my career. So I think that could be a good opportunity. And then beyond that, you're applying for a professorship, and those are hard to come by. So that's where it gets very difficult, especially if you have a family, which I don't right now, but by then I would kind of hope so. But it gets difficult because you can't really just point at a school and say, I want to work here. It's like, who's hiring a professor? Because professors, if you think about it, they're old. They hold their jobs for a long time. They don't like to let go of their jobs. And they get that tenureship and they just save it until they're like 125 years old. Mm-hmm. And because of that, people like me who are new and up and coming, we're like, all right, who's retiring? So you're waiting for a spot to open up in your field. So I would need a school to say, you know, we want to hire someone to teach neuroscience classes and work in the neuro department or perhaps development. And, you know, that needs to all kind of align. So I'd like to work at a place like, I'd like to come back to Baylor College of Medicine where I am now. I love this institution. I'd be very happy as a professor there. alternatively, there's Rice, there's all the UT schools, maybe even going up to like UT Austin or something, I would be open to. So thankfully, Texas has so many great schools that it increases the likelihood of being able to snag a job. But you're never really guaranteed. So you never know. Could get pushed out to, you know, University of Michigan, go home. You never know.
Yeah. I mean, like, but even by then, I feel like maybe there's like other opportunities coming up because I feel, and this is another one of my premonitions that that science is getting a big boost already. Science has always been getting it has slowly been building its cred with society. You know, the iPhone definitely pushed that 1,000%, right? You know, any
Yeah.
any kind of like nifty thing that we get pushes science in the good in like or at least technology in like a direction of that format. But I've noticed that, you know, with the rise of people like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson and people who are kind of like good speakers, and they're also science popularizers. Like you have like Neil deGrasse Tyson, you have like you know, Bill Nye, you have Lawrence Krauss. Lawrence Krauss. I always say his name wrong. Anyways, so you have all these people who are like not necessarily science like teachers, but they're definitely teaching in like auditoriums, and you know they're kind of bringing it to the masses. You know, you could go bring it to the people, to the kids in Detroit that obviously want to learn about.
Yeah. That's actually kind of something I've thought about doing, is maybe trying to make like a YouTube channel or something to teach kids about science. Because like you mentioned Bill Nye, and growing up, I really liked that. When you had a substitute teacher and they put on Bill Nye, that was like the best case scenario, because it's either that or it's going to be something really, really boring. And so every time you'd hear that song playing, like you'd get real hype and you're like, all right.
Everybody in the classroom was like, Bill. Like they built it in. They built it in.
It's so cool. So I think having a fun, like you're saying, a really fun way to engage, especially young kids, and get them to learn something and be interested in something would be so much fun. So I've thought about that, doing like YouTube or something, because I like teaching a lot, and it's cool. I think, like you're saying, YouTube and platforms like that have helped a lot to get people interested in more academic topics than they would normally. I think people's exposure to a wide range of topics like economics and science and politics and religions is really impressive. Like people can rattle off some fun facts about all kinds of stuff nowadays because they are exposed to so much. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I always felt there was a misconception that the average American is kind of stupid, and that's always told to me by an average American. So I don't understand why they wouldn't subscribe to the idea. But
yeah, like who are we all pointing these fingers at?
yeah, you know, by you know the averages, you are average for the most part. So you also do a lot of drawing and painting. I've seen you've posted a couple of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Growing up, my family didn't really have a lot of money, so art was one of the only things I really had as a hobby, just because it's so cheap to get, you know, paper and crayons and paints and stuff. So I really grew up doing it and got to be really good. And I ended up getting art scholarships for college. Actually, I could have gone to the Lansing Community College in Michigan, or a couple schools like in Detroit, for free, or at least for discounts or something, but I would have had to major in art. And it was kind of funny. My mom wanted me to be an artist my whole life, and she was always like, don't be a scientist, be an artist. And we joke that it's usually the other way around, that usually the parents are like, be a doctor, be a rocket scientist, and the kid is like, no, I want to go be a street artist. And for us, it was the opposite. But I definitely love it. It's something I try to do. Now, when I was in college, I didn't produce anything. Like I maybe made a painting, a sketch now and then. I kind of went years very barren without producing anything. And I realized that if I set aside time to do art, I really feel so much better. It really does make me so much happier. My first year of grad school here in Houston, I didn't really make anything either because I felt so busy. And I've realized that being too busy is just an excuse. It's not true. You can make time to do these things. And the past year or so, I've been able to make a lot more drawings, and I do like portraits. I also will do still lifes. And when I paint, I like to paint whole little stories and scenes and stuff. I'm a big fan of Norman Rockwell. He's my favorite American artist. And I'm nowhere like that, but I like his concept of where you look at the picture and it tells you a little story. Like you can get glimpses of people's character or the charm of a town, that kind of stuff. So I try to kind of paint images like that with a lot of detail and love. Yeah, so I definitely love that kind of thing. And now I'm new to Instagram, but I'm mostly following artists. So I get a lot of art inspiration that I consume on there, and that's been pretty cool.
So do you have any art to show us today that you want to show off?
Not really here. I don't. And I wasn't sure if the video component of the podcast was going on either. But I'm actually staying at like a friend's house right now for quarantine, just because I would be all alone, like completely alone otherwise. So I don't have any visual arts here with me. But if you wanted, I could send you like pictures of them and stuff. I have little portfolios and things.
Do it.
Cool. I want to see
it.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, back to science for a second. All right, you're a scientist,
and artist,
artist, a savage, and a scholar.
Yes, definitely.
I always laugh at that.
I like it.
Thank you. So the one of the things that like I was thinking about whenever you were talking about like how you do spinal cord research, do you actually deal with stem cells at all? Are stem cells going to save the world, is what I'm saying.
Right. So throughout college, I was really into stem cells, and I worked in several labs doing stem cell-based research. When I applied for my PhD, that was what I wrote about, was that I want to use stem cells to generate functional spinal cord tissue to graft into patients to replace the tissue that has died and been busted up from the injury. And I was like, 100%, this is the future. Stem cells are my jam. They will be the foundation of my career. And then when I met the man who I work for now, he was actually one of my interviews in order to be accepted at Baylor College of Medicine. And I wasn't familiar with him and his work before that. But when we sat down to talk, he really won me over about two different things. And one was his model of using the optic nerve instead of the spinal cord, like I told you about. Now, I'm building out spinal cord stuff in the lab, but he did convince me that the optic nerve is kind of a good surrogate for a lot of these basic questions. But the second thing he really opened my eyes to is the fact that when these cells, when this tissue has been injured, it doesn't automatically die, actually. It takes several days, several weeks, really, for those nerves to die after they've been hurt. And the thing is, they actually have a program inside of them to regenerate. The thing is, the program that tells the cells to die, it's an intrinsic, like, signaling cascade. And you can manipulate that. And if you play around with it, you can dampen the parts of the cell that tell it to die, and you can make louder the signals that tell the cell to live and to actually regrow and regenerate and repair itself. And one thing that people don't think a lot about is the fact that the nerves that run through your arms and legs actually do regenerate pretty well. That does decline with age, but for the most of your life, they actually can regenerate. Lesser organisms as well, like starfish and lizards and stuff like that, they can regenerate really, really well, even their central nervous system, their brain and their spine. So it's actually an oddity that as a higher level vertebrate, our spines don't regenerate and our brains don't regenerate. That's actually weird because most nerves want to regenerate. So he basically takes this approach where once that tissue's been hurt, how can you intervene in order to save it and allow it the chance to repair itself, kind of the way that your skin heals, because that program exists. It just needs a little boost. And part of it is the fact that the environment that our spine is in isn't very hospitable to regeneration. So how can we make it better? How could we pharmacologically intervene at the time of the injury? And that appealed to me for a lot of reasons. It's a lot more elegant because you don't have to do a surgery to graft new tissue into somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Now, stem cells are very, very cool because you're able to actually make it patient specific. So I could take, skin cells, which are very easy to obtain, and reprogram them into stem cells. And I've done this with my own hands. I've done this back in college at Yale. And then once you have stem cells, you can drive them to become the tissue that you're interested in. And that could be spinal tissue. It could be pancreatic tissue. It could be a retinal tissue, anything. So that's really powerful. It really is. But that takes so long. It takes weeks and weeks and months, really. If you're good at it, to get from a skin cell to a stem cell takes like 2-3 weeks. Then to get it to be neurons, brain cells, or spine cells or whatever, that's another couple of weeks. And, by that point, this person has been living with this injury for a while. Their tissue is pretty in bad shape. It's messed up. I'm much more like this idea for spinal cord trauma as well as brain trauma to treat it right then and there. Because right now, the standard care for someone who comes into the emergency room with a spinal cord injury or a head injury is pretty much pain management. There's not a whole lot else you can do for somebody. And I think that having something where you could give them an IV, my vision is that it would be a protein-based therapy. My boss likes the idea of using drugs, like a pharmacology approach. I hope that it would be something more akin to how insulin helps people with diabetes, where you have a specific protein that kind of just goes through your bloodstream and is able to modify the environment to function better. And my dream is to really better understand that cell signaling that allows some cells to regenerate and some of them to die, and figure out at the end of the day, what is the final switch that I can boost on or down in order to promote regeneration from within. So your own tissues regenerating. I do think stem cells are a good solution for other things, like for lung repair. I think stem cells have a lot of promise there based on data that I've seen, as well as for a lot of blood diseases, stem cells are very interesting. And also for skin. I've seen a lot of cool science papers where scientists can grow functional skin tissue for people who've had burns and things like that, and apply it, and you can make that from patient-derived tissues, so it's a good organ match for them. They don't reject it and stuff. Stem cells definitely have their application, but for what I do, which is trying to prevent paralysis and neuropathic pain and treat really acute trauma, I really think that this more elegant endogenous approach is going to be a lot more effective than making someone wait until you can grow them new spine tissue and then hope that it integrates with the existing messed up, scarred up tissue weeks later after the injury. I just think it's going to be more effective.
And it also sounds a lot more technologically savvy, right? Because if you don't have to bring in any outside alien, topics or just anything outside of you, if all you do requires yourself, then that'll be kind of cool, right? So whenever you say like there's like some kind of like death going on in between the cells, right? So death goes on in the cells, and then you decide to pick a certain amount of I guess the death happens or is happening, and then you decide to stop it. And then is that what you're trying to do? Are you trying to stop, or are you trying to, like, the ones that are kind of dying, are you trying to revive? Is that what that's what it sounds like? It sounds like you're trying to revive the dying cells.
Yeah, so that means putting a pause on the cell death program. And what my boss hypothesizes is that if you can halt the cell death, because it doesn't happen instantly, basically that trauma that has happened kind of sends a signal back to the cell body where it can realize it's been hurt, and the nerve decides to respond. And basically everything comes down to proteins. So your DNA, right? You have DNA in all your cells, and upon injury, specific portions of that respond and produce proteins in order to attend to that injury. And a lot of these proteins in the spine are pro-cell death. So this happens through a lot of different, like, really complicated processes, but basically your DNA starts to churn out like cell death machinery. And it takes a little bit of time for that to happen. And what we're hoping is that if you can kind of put a pause on that cell death production, either by inhibiting it somehow or degrading it somehow, you would be able to allow the regeneration machinery, you could say, the stuff that the cell needs to make in order to regenerate. You could allow that stuff to catch up and move forward. And there's a lot of evidence for that. Personally, I'm interested in trying to figure out what the cell death proteins are pretty well. That's very well characterized. What's less characterized is really what's needed for regeneration. So that's what I dive into, is trying to see in an injured condition. I play around with the genetics, and I'm trying to figure out at the end of the day, who's a critical regulator that I can manipulate to really promote this regenerative program to override cell death, you know?
I got it.
So
Don't
it's
worry
kind of
about it. Don't worry about it. I can tell you. All right. I know that you've been studying this, and I don't know if you didn't come across this, but it is the powerhouse of the cell. The mitochondria. The answer is the mitochondria.
The mitochondria are a huge mystery in biology, to be totally honest. They're hard to study because they're so small.
Oof. Well, like, you know, your approach to your research, it sounds like, so whenever you're trying to halt like the cells from dying, does that also stop them from hurting? Like, are you also managing their pain at the same time? Because your method sounds more humane. Like, you actually like want them to get better on your own, kind of like rehab, right?
Well, what you're talking about is a higher order thing. So I'm talking about a cell on its own isn't really feeling anything, right? Because pain is something that you experience as a result of a full neural circuit you have, where you have like a certain stimuli and it signals all the way back to your brain, and your nociceptors, or the nerves that kind of understand pain, you know, they signal to parts of your brain to kind of make you think, ow, and it's a weird evolutionary response. But a cell on its own isn't really going to experience pain. So as for the greater thing, where if I can stop the cells from dying, would the organism, the person or the mouse, feel less pain? I would say not until the nerve is fully regenerated. So just letting them survive is helpful, but it's not going to really make a difference in their function recovery unless it also regenerates. So that's kind of, they're not totally linked. Like, you can screw around with the genetics and the conditions, and we can get nerves to live, but they don't regenerate. And similarly, we can get them to grow like crazy, but then they die before they reach where they're supposed to be. And so it's a weird balancing act that we're trying to kind of flesh out. But neuropathic pain tends to be because the nerves that run either from the brain through the spine down to, you know, your hands and your legs and stuff, that circuit is messed up. And it means that your brain is getting erroneous messages that make it hurt even if nothing's hurting you. And neuropathic pain is a big problem. I'm very interested in addressing that. It's a little far off from where I am right now, but I think it's very compelling. But I think you need full regeneration in order to resolve a person's pain sensation.
I see. Okay.
That's crazy. So how long does it take for one cell to die?
It's super variable. I mean, if you smash it at the cell body, it's pretty much toast. So that's the difference between like a brain injury and a spine injury, is the cell bodies are located like in the cortex of the brain. So if you punch someone, like those, like if you watch MMA and people get really smashed in the head, those brain cells are just dying. They're just done. Like, I don't know if there will ever be something we can do to save that. Whereas a spinal injury, you have some distance where it's the long cord-like part of the cell that's been hurt, and it takes a few hours maybe for the signal to really reach the cell body, and then it takes maybe a day or two for the cell to really undergo its cell death program and die. So typically you get a couple days, like a 2-day grace period maybe.
So basically try not to get punched in the head where your brain is.
That's a good rule of thumb for everybody all the time.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
That's just my professional opinion.
It's one of those things that I just won't do.
Yeah.
See Anthony writing
down,
you know, don't get punched in the head.
Yeah. If there's one takeaway from this podcast, it should be that.
All right. So you are a person that grew up in a farm, and growing up in a farm, you probably encountered religion and then later on you probably encountered counter religion, or what I like to call science, right?
Mhm.
What most people like to like, they'll use it as a counter religion. uh, I don't think that they would say that out loud, but
Mhm.
I'm sure that your field is dominated by people who are more of the I guess either agnostic or atheistic side.
Mhm.
Do you feel like that actually is like a big deal in your circle? Do people even talk about stuff like that?
Um, I will say people don't talk a lot about it. You're 100% right about what you're saying. And there's definitely an assumption that you're non-religious or atheist for sure. And people will casually make comments kind of that nature. And personally, I kind of learned a long time ago not to really give my opinion unless I'm asked. But I always will be honest if I'm asked. So I definitely am Christian and I do believe in God. And for me, the more I've learned about biology and science and how life works, the more convinced I am that there's signatures of a creator and all of this. And I don't really like push that down people's throats, but I do believe it. And I will say, I think it's really important because you're right. I am in a field that's predominantly non-religious. And I would also like to point out that I'm in a field that has really, really bad mental health problems. And graduate students, like PhD candidates like myself, are really high risk for depression and even like self-harm and all kinds of bad stuff. And you hear that kind of stuff a lot. People have a tough time. And being a student anywhere in any field is stressful because you're always kind of being assessed, and that just is uncomfortable for people. But I will say it seems like the higher up you go, the less happy people tend to get in academics. And I've noticed, and it's purely correlative, but as people kind of like lose faith, they also seem to not feel so happy and motivated, to push
Right.
through. And I guess
More
if you don't,
nihilistic, right?
yeah, if you don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, I guess it's hard for me to imagine it would be difficult to get through all of the hardships and all of the gray days that being a scientist comes with. But I think it's really important. I do. It's interesting. I'll say, yeah, definitely the culture is kind of like you're saying counter-religious. I think it is. But to me, I don't see any conflict with being very, very scientifically driven and also being religious and faithful, because in my opinion, there's just no overlap. They're completely different exercises because science is very, very evidence-based. If you don't have proof, I don't believe you. You have to prove something 10 different ways. And I won't, even then I'll be suspicious. And something is only true until someone else disproves it or proves something else. And now we believe that. Whereas religion, faith is the whole point. The whole point is that you can't measure it. You'll never really get a definitive answer. It's just something that you exercise your determination to believe in, and that you believe there's value in that, and it makes you feel good. Science isn't supposed to make you feel good. Science just is or it isn't. And religion is completely different. So I just feel like, to me, maybe I'm like, people are totally welcome to argue with me about this. I just feel like there's no conflict there because one of them is an exercise in faith and one of them is absolutely an exercise in fact-based, evidence.
Evidence, yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I mean, just looking at it through like the eyes of a person who is more religious would probably be I would say that they would see things differently than a person who is more atheistic. Like a person who's atheistic who probably would not give certain, would not see certain things that I would call like, like outside authorities helping, right? It's like, so like the mitochondria, right? The mitochondria is
The powerhouse
the
of the
powerhouse of
cell.
the cell, of course.
Yeah.
But the mitochondria is like, it used to be outside, right? And then
Yeah.
somehow came inside. There's no real knowledge base of how that even happened. It just so happened to be that those two things, like, and now it's an outside authority giving energy to the house. I mean, to the cell, as we all know.
Yeah.
And now the mitochondria can't live without outside of the cell, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. So it's like it has to be inside of the cell. So they're connected now. Like they can't be unconnected.
Yeah, I guess my opinion is because of course someone who's super duper non-religious, you know, they must therefore believe that all of the things that are today, that are alive and functioning and whatnot, are the result of random molecules bumping together at random and completely random, like evolutionary drive. And I certainly believe in evolution, and I have a good understanding of genetics and how there is like a lot of stochastic random events that lend new traits and how those get acted on. I totally believe that, of course. But given that, I think that's a mechanism by which God can act and shape things. And I look at the world around us, and I don't believe for a second that all of this is the result of random molecules bumping together. I think just the likelihood of that is so small, so unbelievable. And I'm not saying it's impossible. I don't think so. I think it's much more likely that there's a guiding force that has shaped certain things to be the way that they are. And I think human beings being so distinct from all the other animal life on Earth is very special. I don't see why things would unfold the way that they are. So to me, like you're saying, when I see a really cool, especially because my degree is in development, and how a single cell turns into a complete organism is like the closest thing to magic that I can imagine. And to me, I had a great reverence for kind of the religious aspect of that. Like, how is this possible? It's wild when you see how these tissues fold and shape, and it's just crazy. All the things that can go wrong. And sometimes they do, but the fact that they ever turn out right, to me, is like unfathomable without some kind of, you know, guiding force, in my opinion. But thankfully in science, I don't really need to like say that day to day. I can kind of think those things and be like, ooh, so that's how it's designed, you know, without really bothering people.
You like look up, you're like, crafty.
Yeah. You got me, man. You got me.
It's like, good job, man. I couldn't have thought of a better way to do this.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. That's how I feel. That's my internal monologue, I guess. Yeah.
I really like that. That's like probably one of the best explanations of like someone's faith that I've ever heard.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you're really good at talking and explaining what you're thinking.
Well, thank you. That's good, because I'll be a professor one day, and I hope I'm not a bad one.
No, not at all. I think you're gonna get that grant, and you should definitely have like a for kids only like YouTube channel.
Yeah. Kids only, like no grown-ups.
Yes. No, please. If you're over 30, you cannot watch this.
I'd like to ask the parents to leave the room now.
You know how certain websites have, are you under 21 or over 21? You always click yes, and then this time you do yes, and it just logs you out, right? Get out of here. Tricks are for kids.
Wow.
All right, so I wanted to see, Anthony, did you have any questions to shout to Mary before I ask her my final question?
No, not really. I mean, I've just been sitting here just enjoying and listening and taking in everything that you have to say. It's really cool. Really cool, everything that you have to say. I really have to share this with a friend of mine. He actually has a spinal cord injury, and he's a quadriplegic now. So
oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll be interested in hearing what you have to say about some things.
That is crazy. You know, where do you wait before? I guess now that brought me on another question. What do you think we'll be in a couple of years with this? How? I guess the next thing. What's the next step in that type of research that you're doing? Right. Let's just say that your hunches are 100% right. Right. And then you get like a eureka moment, and then somehow you're able to, you know, whatever. How does this look like? How does this medicine or this thing would look like in the future? Would it be like you go to the like you know, just put a little cream on, and then that makes your body react, and then like
wrinkle cream, how that works, but it's for your skin.
What is that? How does it work?
I think what I'm imagining is either, like I said, protein-based or maybe cell-based therapy. And it would be like, as someone comes into the ER, it would probably be delivered intravenously so that it runs through their bloodstream, or possibly kind of like those injections that you can do right into the spine, like women when they're having babies will get, that kind of thing. I think it would definitely be like a fluid suspension being injected into the bloodstream or into the cerebrospinal fluid. And it would just be something like that, where it would be able to kind of provide support and nurture those nerve cells as they're trying to regenerate. And so molecularly, it would be helping to slow down the death process and speed up the regeneration process and let those cells really get a head start. But yeah, it would probably be delivered like, it's what I imagine, intravenously kind of.
All right, so now we're talking, right? Just going off of your intravenously, you said it, all right? She said it, okay? So I'm walking and then I break my back somehow, and then I just pulled out a thing, just and then just like my back just starts like fixing itself, right? Does it
well, nerves grow about 1 millimeter per day, so it would take you a while, depending on how bad your cut was. If it was like a clean cut, or if it's like a huge tear or something, I mean, there's definitely a lot of variability in these injuries. That's one of the reasons they're interesting to study, is because the location and the severity makes a big difference. Also, like a partial injury versus a whole injury, like is the spine completely severed or is it just kind of hacked halfway? That makes a big difference too. When you hear about people having spontaneous motor recovery, it's always a very partial injury. Someone who has a complete severance of their spinal cord never has spontaneous motor recovery. My hope, of course, is that I'd be able to help promote the like reintegration of the spine, and that, you know, would improve those chances. But yeah, it wouldn't be that fast. You'd still be in the hospital laid up for a while. It's just that at the end of it, you would have much more motor recovery than you would get nowadays. If you broke your back today versus in, 10 years from now, if the kind of stuff that people like me are working on is in the clinic by then, you're still going to have a lot of downtime. It's still a bad injury.
So the thing that's stopping is not even your skills, it's the actual development, the way that it grows. It just grows slow. It's not like if you have the best tech and the best things, it would grow faster. Or maybe just a little faster, but not enough.
Probably, like, once we get it growing, the next step would probably be like, how do we make it grow even faster? The problem is, once you start pumping in stuff that makes cells grow fast, those tend to also be like cancerous, because cancer is a growth problem. It's an overgrowth kind of disease. So that's like a whole nother kinds of cell mechanism to start looking at. But it's very valid, like that you could potentially find a way to make it happen faster. I don't really know. I feel like first things first, you just want to be able to try to make it heal at all. So I will say experimentally, it's not that we can't. Like, I have mice whose eyeball, like optic nerve and spines regenerate pretty well. The problem is the genetic manipulation that I do to make that happen is very pro-cancer. So it works experimentally because I can use it as kind of a positive control where I can force the regeneration, because then I can also manipulate something else and all of a sudden they don't regenerate anymore. Oh no, that means this other gene was also required for regeneration. It's good for piecing apart the puzzle, but that wouldn't be a good therapy because it might give people cancer. So, when you get around to like the speed and how robust the regeneration is, you got to be careful, because right now we've got stuff we could blast you with that would make your cells grow. You just don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes
so
a lot
that's
of
why,
sense.
yeah, it's got to be tailored just right.
Yeah, so you either get killed by death or get killed by immortality, right? So, right?
Sure.
The immortality of a cancer cell, maybe.
It's an immortal, what I would just say, just an immortal growth.
It sounds like a recipe, Put a little this, put a little that.
Yeah.
Except if you put a little bit of this,
Put
you
a
might
little
get cancer.
and it works.
That's how it feels in the lab sometimes. You're like, and I'll throw in a little bit of this and see what happens. It's true.
That's how you learn. That's how you find out what actually works. Oh no!
That's what you're hoping for, right? You're gonna drop the chemical X on this, and you're like, I made the
yeah.
Yeah,
There's nothing like a surprise discovery, like coming to your boss and saying, hey, I was just screwing around, but look how interesting this is. Like, they love that.
no, has that happened with you?
Yeah, he's had stuff like that happen too. He's told me stories from when he was a PhD student like me, and it's really charming. He'll talk about how he'd go to his boss and he'd be like, I can't explain it, but these neurons in the dish, they just grow like crazy when I add this special thing. And his boss was like, okay, if you can figure out how it works, you know, you can publish that paper. And he said he could never figure out how it worked.
Oh.
It's just this mystery that like could be really helpful in medicine, but we'll never know.
Well, no, we will. I feel like you got it.
Yeah.
That's what he didn't know. And that's what he's teaching you, right? That's why he has you as his disciple, his kohai.
That's right. I am his protege. I'm also his first mentee, so that's a very special position.
Oh,
I'm like his first and only born child.
that's true.
Academically.
He's gonna teach you to kick down trees with your bare hands, and then
Yeah.
Right.
True. But he's a California guy, so he loves the trees. He wouldn't do that.
It's true. Banana.
Yeah.
Okay. So, do you have any poetry for us?
A portrait for you?
Poetry. Close.
Oh, poetry. Sorry, I heard portrait. I do. So
yourself?
Sorry?
Can you explain why? Or what got you into poetry?
You know, I don't even know what got me into it. I think it's like, I'm not a big like diary or journaler, but I've always kind of liked writing. I think writing is fun. And I read books and poetry and things. And sometimes it's kind of inspiring to try to, you know, craft words together. So one thing I started doing recently actually is a lot of haikus, which are the like 5-7-5 syllable lines. And they're usually kind of like about nature and beautiful things like that. And I got really into those actually, because I read a book about them. So I could share a few of those. They're kind of silly. Or I also have a longer form, kind of like more serious poem.
I'm gonna let you choose, but you know, whichever one you choose, tell us why you made it, and then go.
Okay. All right. I'll give you. How about I'll do a haiku. I can do like a couple haikus because they're small.
Yeah.
Right.
They're by YouTube size.
Yeah. They're little.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's one I did that says, "Though rain ends by dawn, puddles and twigs linger like fragments of a dream." And I wrote that because I was walking into lab on a Sunday I ride the Metro light rail, and it had rained like storms the night before, and there were little puddles and sticks everywhere. That's pretty nice. I got one because I draw that it says, pencil on paper, the sweet stillness of morning devours the soft sound. Like that. I don't know if these are silly. I don't know if you guys like these at all. I have a romantic one. The sunflower sways, not for the breeze, but rather for the honeybee.
Oh. Well, now you know which one's their favorite, right? This one got a reaction.
I know, so the other poem I had was like, I'll do like a snippet of a long one, okay? Because I feel like the haikus are just sort of like low-hanging fruit sometimes. Okay, this one is about a boy, okay?
Everybody.
It's about a boy. I've never read these to anyone, so I feel like an absolute corn dog right now. Like if you were here, I'm blushing and stuff. Okay. The depth of his dark eyes reminds me of the fresh spring earth, of caramel black tea, of faithfulness. They show me that this wretched earth aspires to be a heaven once more. If I were a sunflower rooting into that soft, warm earth, I would stretch my roots into the colorless nothingness until I found purchase at the rich, arable bottom. I would forever breathe life into that sweet, ardent place. Or maybe I would be buried and the soil would blanket me, a snapshot of germination, a dehydrated stock of neurotransmitters. I transcend mortality either way in that espresso-colored ocean. Dreams and laughter converge in the promise of the dark pools. They look so much like honey in the sunlight. There's that one. It's like long.
That was really good. I
Oh,
imagined
really?
myself being the sunflower in the soil. Oh my goodness.
Getting in there, yeah.
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 Ooh.
Woo.
This is
Oh.
So
about a
that's just
boy?
something like, yeah, yeah. So, yes. So that's just like sometimes you'll be feeling like some type of way, and there's really like nothing else you can do but like kind of write a weird poem about it.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's something that I have thousands of poems here. That is something that we all do.
Yeah, no, I've got like sad ones, and then I've got like weird sappy ones, silly ones. I've got all kinds of stuff. It's weird.
That's true. That's you are pretty weird, but it's a good,
Yeah,
you know, like
it's weird. I feel like we didn't even scratch the surface of the weird. If you'd opened up with like, tell us some weird stuff, there'd have been some weird stuff.
we'll do that for the next one. All right.
I didn't know
Yeah.
that you were that weird, and we would have started off with that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Like for one thing, a quick one, I will tell you right now, I am the fastest crab walker you have ever met in your life, and I will always be. I can crab walk, especially backwards, faster than anyone you know. I will take anyone on anywhere, any place, anywhere, anytime.
Wait,
Crab
Anthony, what
walk.
is
Never
crab
was a
walking?
walker.
You got really surprised by that.
Crab walking, that's amazing.
How does it look? How
Could
do
you
I'm,
be able to demonstrate?
I mean, I probably could. Actually, I could probably.
Like you're on.
So here's the thing. So growing up, I was super shy until college. I like couldn't even talk in class. I wouldn't even raise my hand. I would like blush. I'd get all weird and faint. I had like a lot of issues. So I was super, super shy and introverted. But in gym class, when we did the crab walk race, I was like, I would go so fast. And then I would be like, I'd look around, everyone else was still like halfway across the gym floor. And I was like, and the gym teacher was always kind of like, looked really uncomfortable about it. Like,
This is weird. What do we do about it?
But I was so fast. I'm like supersonic when I go crab walking. So, and then in my adulthood, I brought it up to someone in college and they were like, nah, probably not anymore. And I was like, well, let's take this outside. And we did. And I beat everybody. I beat like college, the athlete guys, the football players, soccer players. Nobody can crab walk faster than me.
Once this quarantine is over, I will challenge you to a crab walking race.
You're on. At the next board game night.
Yeah.
100%.
Yes.
100%.
Oh, definitely. I want to do.
We could play like werewolves, but it's crab people instead. You have to identify the crab people.
You don't understand. I'm about to get so obsessive about crab walking. That's all I'm gonna do now.
Yeah, start training. Start training.
Yeah.
You're gonna need it.
Behind. You're years behind.
I'm like the Tanya Harding of crab walking, okay?
Oh my god. Now I'm scared for my knees.
Yeah, you better watch that.
Yeah.
She's the best crab walker there ever was. You know,
Yeah.
the gym teacher just looked at her and he was like, "My God, she's a net."
Yeah.
So wait, I wanted to ask you something, Mary. Last time I saw you, I could have sworn that your hair was a different color.
Yeah, it was probably blonder, probably.
Yes,
I mix it up. I keep it fresh. I'm probably gonna go get some highlights when quarantine time's over. I like to go
your
back and
natural hair
forth.
color then?
It's a lot like this. I colored it back to dark brown, and it's pretty much just growing out. So it's just like a dark brown color, but I like to mix it up. I get kind of bored with it. And my mom was actually a hairdresser for a long time when I was little. So I've been playing with my hair color since I was pretty young.
Yeah, that's awesome. I did too. I think throughout my high school years, I changed my hair color like 5 times or 6 times.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I've never colored my hair. I don't know. It was like a little fun like thing of you know, being a teenager and just trying to see.
Yeah.
You know, but because like I don't know if boys have this issue, but like I know girls like we really struggle to kind of like grow into like our faces and how we're gonna look like for the rest of our life. You know, like you know, I had long hair like almost all my life, but short hair is where it's at for me. Like I'm never going back to long hair. Like I see pictures of myself and I'm like, oh my God, old Janet was so innocent. Like she didn't know.
She didn't know.
Yeah, cutting your hair is like a big leap, you know, but it's one of those ones that if it pays off, then it really pays off.
Mm.
Yeah, and you know, you don't know it until you try it, and I think, I mean, hair is a big deal, right? Like it like it defines you, like it kind of makes you who you are in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I mean, like I've looked like a person with a 5 o'clock shadow since I was in 5th grade, so I pretty much look
That's
the same.
powerful.
All right. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we close the?
Oh man, I don't know.
No, nothing. No. I guess.
Anything I'm like burning to share with the world.
Yeah, burning to share. I know that Janet wanted to share about the ecosystem, and we're gonna talk about recycling and doing a whole bunch of all of that global warming stuff. Janet's all into it right now.
Yeah, we're thinking about doing like a separate podcast talking about that, about the environment.
Yeah, like a special.
Hmm?
It'd be like a special, like an environment special. That sounds good.
Mm. But you don't have anything that you would like to tell the world about your type of science? Or say, watch out, world, Mary's coming.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've already shared a lot.
You have
a lot to digest.
That crab walking thing.
It's 100% true. I can clap with one hand. That's kind of neat.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, not everybody can do that.
Wait, what?
Wait, is
Clapping?
It like a little? That
it's
thing?
like that, but it's different.
Oh. Yes.
Wow.
You are a woman of many tools.
I'm a true Renaissance lady.
Yeah, I would say.
Totally. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here, Mary. You're a Savageness Scholar. Thanks, everybody, for coming. And this has been Savageness Scholars. Got it.
That was
That was amazing.